I've made it clear enough by now that Souls-likes are basically for me the best things ever, and I am forever on the prowl for new ones that can scratch that itch. You can only play Dark Souls games themselves so many times before you grow tired and need something to spice it all up. Be it a half-baked sci-fi theme a la The Surge, or an attempt to marry it to a 2D platformer like Salt and Sanctuary did. So many Souls-likes make some key mistakes though. They focus on making the game difficult without grasping the subtleties that make the difficulty work. They employ a stamina meter for combat and throw in a weapon degradation system, both of which themselves are fairly awful ideas, but at least the stamina one has merit if pulled off just right. Often the devs make the games dark and bleak, but have a plot that's so generic and half-assed or just so shallow that you can't take the game seriously or really get invested. Souls-like is a hard thing to pull off, and even the fanbase doesn't seem to entirely agree with what makes a Souls-like, so seeing an indie game go for it does make me feel a little like I'm a parent watching their 6-year-old's first shift as a feeder for antisocial lions, thinking that this is more likely to go fucking wrong, but sometimes a 6-year-old isn't eaten alive, and sometimes indie Souls can be pulled off really well. Enden Lillies isn't just a Souls-like, it's also a Metroid-Vania game. So we see the usual things that accompany both types of games. Enemies respawn when you use checkpoints, dodging behind enemies is the best way of surviving. There are rooms with specific obstacles that you need late game abilities to bypass, and the exploration is the tops. Enden Lilly starts the game in a grimy basement. You're a child who I took to calling Lily before the game even confirmed that I was right, go clairvoyance. And you basically have been given the task of curing the blight that afflicts this world, and subsequently stopping this dark, dying world from being the dying part of this equation. Now let's get the talk about the audio and visuals down now so that we can move on to the mechanics part, which I'm personally more interested in. The game has a beautiful art style. The environments have what I describe as a dark yet extensive colour palette, and the protagonist in her white dress, white hair and white skin contrasts effectively with the deeper colours of the world she is exploring. It really gives you the sense that she is this beacon of hope and purity that the story keeps saying that she is. The sound design is a little bit off. Not bad, but some of the sound effects don't really mesh well with the look and feel of the game. The combat noises are fine, that's not where I'm worried about. It's the high-pitched tones that play when you select menu things, or the healing spell sound effect that you get, which sound like they're from one of those turn-based RPGs from several decades ago. It's all a bit off, but you could argue that it's again designed to contrast with the darker and harsher sounds that you find in the world. Maybe for me it's just that some of them feel like they're too video gamey, if that makes any sort of sense. Of course it doesn't, that's a stupid fucking sentence. But if I'm being honest, the game won't lose many points for this. Maybe 1 or 2, you know, low-level single-digit point loss is the worst that can happen here, because otherwise I love how this game looks and sounds. The gameplay is not based around stamina management like you might expect. Rather, your basic melee skill has a set number of attacks that can go into a single combo before pausing briefly for the next set. And being honest here, I'm kinda glad to see the stamina bar not making a return appearance here. I don't really trust that guy. He has a tendency to ruin parties and spend hours on the toilet because he needs a 5-minute break between each 5-ounce nugget he squeezes out. Also, these melee attacks are less melee and more you just summon a swordsman dude to attack for you where you are. In fact, all of your combat skills are just spirits that you slot in and out of one of 2 loadouts that you can switch between. And most, aside from your swordsman dude and later this boss hammer bro you get, have a set number of uses that reset at checkpoints. And since you can have a total of about 6 powerful spells, at least at the time I'm playing, maybe you unlock a 3rd one later on, I don't know. But let's say for sake of argument you can have a total of 6 powerful skills with you at any given time that when used right can completely devastate your foes, and I think this balances out the numbered uses thing that can otherwise be a bucket of worms if employed wrong. You also have 3 usable healing spells that reset at checkpoints too, though so far I've been able to tell if you can increase their uses permanently, or if you have to solely rely on the random flowers that litter the world that restore a use if you break one. Thankfully all the bosses in the game, or at least the ones I saw, have all had a checkpoint right outside the boss room with no enemies between them and the boss, so you're able to go into these encounters with full health and spells. And maybe I just need to progress a little further to be able to upgrade this rather useful power. It is your only means of healing. There are no healing items or any other things you can unlock for that, at least not that I saw. Again, it might be a case of just having to progress further, but in the 4 or 5 hours I spent playing the game so far I'm yet to see anything. Speaking of upgrades, you can upgrade your spells, but this is a rather frustrating thing because the cost of the resources to do this raises drastically with every upgrade. And after only 3 hours of playing, I had like 8 or 9 different skills. 2 of them needed rarer resources to be able to upgrade even once, and the punchline to this funny joke is that these were my default swordsman / hammer bro attacks, and the rest needed about 30 stagnant blight, as is the name of the go-to resource for leveling shit up, and on top of all that, the cost increased by this amount every time you upgraded, so most of my current skills need about 90 stagnant blight, which is mental. I don't find that much in the game. Luckily you can grind resources from crates and barrels you wreck as you explore the world, but most of the time, a barrel or a group of crates will have only like one of these upgrade materials in them. You occasionally find stacks of 10, but these are quite rare, and most of the ones I could see were hidden behind areas that you couldn't access because you didn't have the appropriate skill yet. It all just feels a bit unbalanced to me, you know? Maybe the late game areas offer more resources, or maybe it's just an oversight that needs to be fixed. See, I should mention that the game is in early access, if I haven't already, so anything I say here might be fixed when all is said and done. And I do sort of hope that's the case, because despite my bitching and moaning that you all love so much, I do rather like this game. Even with all of its issues, it still feels like a fully fledged video game that just needs some creases ironed out, really. The maps are expansive and fun to explore, with enemy encounters that encourage careful planning and reward a skilled approach. The bosses have a nice level of tragic backstory that ties into the game's overall plot, and they all find that sweet spot of being challenging without taking the piss. Even with the free stages they all seem to have, and the massive health bars they carry around with them, they are all really well designed, and importantly, they're all readable enough that it does not take long to get to grips with them. The longest I was stuck on one of them was about 10 minutes, and only because I had to deal with the fact that she was a flying enemy, which in 2D games I'm usually quite sucky at dealing with. It was also because a lot of my attacks in this game were quite short range, but a trip back to an early game area and a fight with a sub-boss later gifted me a new power that I could use against her, basically a flying crow that shoots magical balls at people, which really helped do some damage to her while I was dodging all of her attacks. I know I've already talked about the audio and the visuals, but I really like the background music track, so I want to praise them a little bit here, separately. That's just the sort of thing I do. I just love how this game sounds when it comes to background music. I think it fucking nails it. I love the second area of the game the most for having a background music track that managed to be that weird mix of beautiful and slightly creepy. Sort of, in my book, it reminded me a lot of the movie Coraline, which personally just adds a whole ton of points to the game right there. I should probably tell you that I didn't finish the game, not yet anyway. I got a bit stuck, and I can't tell if I'm stuck because I'm a bit thick, fair assumption, or if it's because the early access nature of the game has caused it to be set up in a way to impede progress so that the game can be enjoyed upon its full release. Of course, more likely I'm just a fucking idiot. But either way, I wasn't left feeling too bad. I'm quite happy to check the game out when it's a fully fledged release. The game is fun, at least it is from what I've seen. It had a decently made combat system that was responsive and intuitive, swapping between loadouts on the fly is easily done, dodging behind attacking enemies always works, and the feedback from most of your attacks give it a sense of weight. I love the look of the game environments and the enemy design, and it all manages to strike that Souls-like sweet spot of being tough but fair. I'd also go so far as to say it feels a bit more accessible than certain Souls-like / Metroid-Vania games, at least as far as I've seen. As I say, some areas do need a bit of a look and maybe a rebalance. I also think another spell check is due for some of the earlier dialogue lines I saw. There is also a level up system that doesn't really seem to do anything, aside from slightly affect how much health you have. And when I say slightly, I mean really fucking slightly, as in it doesn't seem to make any significant difference. So maybe we need to add more to the level up system here. But despite everything, I'm not left feeling negative about the game. I'd also like to point out that I didn't see any bugs or obvious glitches in my time playing. There was a slight frame rate drop at one bit, but that only happened once in that one area and never again, so I don't really think it's a big problem. And my overall feelings are that this is a game with true promise, and one made by a developer who has a vision. Not the most unique vision, I'll admit, but one that they are trying to execute as well as they physically can, and are mostly succeeding in doing so. Enden Lilly is a fun little Metroid-Vania-Souls-like. It nails certain aspects of this design, and in the areas it falls short, you can make the early access argument without it seeming disingenuous. I'll even give it a recommendation now. I fully intend to give it a fresh look when it's released properly. It's an indie game that is trying, honestly trying to be a good game, and in this day and age, that just seems so rare, so maybe that alone is why I wanted to discuss it for you today.